if anyone's shy about, just wanted to let everyone know that we are recording this, and if anyone's shy about it, just feel free not to turn your camera on. We are going to be having, I'm going to be sharing the recording through the proceedings as well. All right. So I want to do a land acknowledgement. CAP acknowledges that to the stolen land on which we operate is the traditional territories of the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, and the Haudenosaunee and Wendat peoples. And as part of the effort that we've been also advancing, we've been trying to use the land acknowledgements as an opportunity for learning a little bit more, so that it, in addition to recognizing the stolen land and acknowledging the care that Indigenous people have taken with the land through eons. We wanted to also kind of do a little bit of a sharing on our learning for us. So I'm going to just share this video because I was very curious about smudging.
Here at Trent University, we participate in smudging, and it would be a great opportunity, and you'll come across an opportunity for you to participate in that. And so please just engage in it. Now, so what we do is, if we're offering a smudge, it's like a little ceremony, and usually our elders lead it. We have 4 medicines, but there are 3 that we use for smudging: sweetgrass, sage, and cedar. And generally we use sage here when we're smudging. So that's usually the primary one that we use. And so what we would do is we'd stand in a circle, and an elder would lead, or a knowledge holder would lead. And what you would do is when they get to you, is you take that smoke and it's like washing your face. So you take the smoke and you cleanse yourself with it. And what it does is it helps you clear away any negative energy and just be present to what's unfolding right now in your life. And it helps move away those irritants that can get stuck on us. And so it's always an amazing opportunity, and you always feel so much clearer and present at the end of it. When we smudge, really, it's an opportunity to cleanse. So like, we don't want anything to get in the way. So usually we'll take our glasses off, and we can put it over the smoke if you want to cleanse them. I generally do that because I just really like putting it back on my face that way. And so what we do is we'll take that smoke. I said it was like washing, so that's what you would do. So you take the smoke and you're going to clean your mind over you so that you can think good thoughts or welcome those good thoughts. And then you're going to clean your eyes so you can see good things. You can see your pathway, the pathway you're going in a good way. And then you're going to clear your ears so you can hear good things coming in to your life. And then you're going to clean your mouth, because those words that you want to speak need to come from kindness and compassion. And so it's really important for us to remember that as well. And then we generally will do our heart so that we can feel in a good way. And then all of us, so as we move on our path, then we can move on our path in a good way.
So thank you so much on joining me on learning a little bit about smudging. I appreciate that. And now I am going to turn it over to, just give me 1 second. I am going to turn it over to Anne, and I'm going to pull up the presentation. And I'm just going to make sure it's in slideshow format. And make sure that everybody is still able to in the webinar. Okay. Thank you so much, Anne. I really appreciate you taking the time to join the municipal network and bring them up to speed on the changes to the wetland protection system and municipal implications on that associated with the wetland protections changes that have taken place. So please take it away, Anne.
Thanks so much, Gabby. I'm really happy to be here, and I appreciate the opportunity very much. And thanks to everybody who's joining in today. My presentation is going to focus on the case for wetland conservation, as well as the state of wetland protection in Ontario at the moment. Why should we care about wetlands? What benefits do marshes, swamps, fens, and bogs provide to the municipalities? And how well are we doing at protecting wetlands and the benefits that they provide? Next slide, please. So I'm the Director of Conservation and Education at Ontario Nature, which is a charitable conservation organization dedicated to protecting wild species and wild spaces through conservation, education, and public engagement. Established in 1931, we now represent over 30,000 individual members and supporters and over 155 member groups. Chances are there's a member group known as the Nature, well, not quite ready for this, but that's okay. Chances are this is a map of the Nature Network. And so chances are there's a Nature Network member group in your community. And I just want you to know that when it comes to protecting nature, they can be your ally, an extremely knowledgeable and extremely dedicated ally. Thanks. Next slide, please. So Ontario Nature's engagement in wetlands has been long-standing. We began documenting wetland decline back in 1937, so a long time ago. And then we started really campaigning in earnest for wetland protection in the 1970s. We had a major influence in policy development all the way through, including the original Ontario Wetland Policy, the first one, the Ontario Wetland Evaluation System, more recently, the Ontario Wetland Conservation Strategy, etc. All the way along, we've been involved in numerous local campaigns to protect wetlands as well. Next slide, please. There are many good reasons to stand up for wetlands. You don't have to be a scientist or a naturalist to understand why wetlands are important and why they're wonderful from a biodiversity perspective. I'm a regular, even daily visitor to my local wetland, which is in High Park in Toronto. And I go there primarily to see the birds, but you know, I'm never there alone. There are always other people there with their family and friends looking at things in the wetland, whether it's a frog or a turtle or a heron or a muskrat, sometimes a beaver if people get lucky. So whatever it is, there are lots of reasons why people come there, and it's really a wonderful place for urban dwellers to reconnect with the natural world. Of course, beyond enriching our lives in this very experiential and personal way, there are many significant wetlands there are many significant benefits that wetlands provide, and most people are largely unaware of them. But I've listed them here. Wetlands provide refuges and movement corridors for plants and animals. They store and sequester carbon. They're important in flood and erosion control. They purify water. They provide wild foods and medicines, and they provide wonderful recreational and tourism opportunities. These benefits are critical at any time, but especially now, faced as we are with the twin crises of biodiversity loss and climate change. Next slide, please. And all of these wetlands have, the benefits provided have significant economic value. One study commissioned by the Government of Ontario a few years back determined that in Southern Ontario, the benefits provided by wetlands were worth at least, conservatively estimated, $51 billion per year. Another study released more recently out of the University of Waterloo in 2021 estimated that the water purification benefits alone were worth $4.2 billion, again in Southern Ontario annually. And another study of specific relevance to the conversation this morning found that wetlands have a significant role to play in reducing flood damages and costs. Next slide, please. Given their immense value, it should be obvious why wetland conservation and restoration are so important. Among other things, they're widely regarded as nature-based solutions to climate change. So that's a new jargon piece, right? Nature-based solutions to climate change. Anyway, beyond the primary and vital task of reducing GHG emissions, wetland conservation offers a complementary and cost-effective way to help mitigate and enhance our resilience to climate change. That's because wetlands help to sequester and store carbon, offer refuges for wildlife and movement corridors, and they help to mitigate and control flooding. And it's this last benefit that I will focus on in the remainder of my presentation this morning. Next slide, please. So as municipal staff and planners, and I apologize if I'm just telling you things that you already know. It's hard to know where people are coming in to this conversation, but anyway, you are no doubt more than aware of the major urban flooding events that have taken place in Ontario over the last decade, and their enormous cost to homeowners, to governments, and to taxpayers. As this slide indicates, urban flooding events are frequent and they're taking place across the province. from Thunder Bay to Windsor to the GTA to Eastern Ontario, everywhere. For more information on these and other events and how prepared or not we are to deal with them, see the Auditor General's 2022 report released last fall. It's entitled Climate Change Adaptation, Reducing Urban Flood Risk. It definitely won't set your mind at ease, but it does provide that factual basis and recommendations for action. Next slide, please. The risk of urban flooding is increasing, as pointed out by Ontario's Special Advisor on Flooding in 2019. And the cause, according to the Auditor General, is threefold. The conversion of green space, including wetlands, to impervious surfaces, the inadequate or aging stormwater infrastructure, and climate change and increasingly frequent heavy rain events. I expect this isn't news, but again, for more information, see the Auditor General's 2022 report. Next slide, please. In this context of climate change and more frequent storm and flooding events, it's easy to see why wetlands matter. Wetlands are nature's shock absorbers. During storms, they absorb much of the surface water runoff and then they slowly release it. They moderate water flow and they do it for free while providing many other cool benefits at the same time. Next slide, please. The 2019 report of the Ontario Special Advisor on Flooding underlined the economic benefit of the role played by wetlands. They are, and I quote, cost-effective in reducing flood damages and associated costs. According to the report, maintaining wetlands can reduce flood damages and costs by 29% in rural areas and by 38% in urban areas. And I expect that most of you would agree that this is a significant economic benefit and one that should be factored into municipal decision-making, municipal decisions about land use. Next slide, please. And here's another important point from the Auditor General's 2022 report. Even small wetlands matter. A wetland as small as 2 hectares can retain water runoff from an area 70 times its size, significantly reducing flood damage. We mustn't forget this, because small wetlands, especially in Southern Ontario, are the most at risk. A study from the University of Waterloo in 2022 found that small wetlands under 2 hectares in size are disappearing from the landscape at a disproportionate rate in Ontario. That's because they usually don't qualify as provincially significant, and so they don't benefit from the protections that that designation confers. In fact, they're typically not even evaluated. So they're the most likely to be destroyed and replaced with stormwater management ponds. And the trouble with that, of course, is that stormwater management ponds just don't provide the same suite of co-benefits. And they aren't free. Next slide, please. Indeed, the cost of human-made stormwater infrastructure generally, including ponds, sewers, culverts, and so on, is a big problem in Ontario. A 2016 report by the Auditor General highlighted the distinct advantages of green infrastructure, such as urban forests and wetlands, compared to so-called gray human-made infrastructure. Green infrastructure was recognized as a powerful tool to manage stormwater, reduce costs, increase climate resilience, reduce combined sewer overflows, lower pollutant loads, mitigate flood risk, and recharge groundwater. The report also pointed out that there's a huge stormwater infrastructure deficit in Ontario, $6.8 billion in 2016. At that time, most municipalities were not fully recovering costs associated with stormwater management, and most did not have asset management plans for their stormwater infrastructure. So the cost of human-made infrastructure is another good reason why wetlands matter. Next slide, please. Given the myriad benefits that wetlands provide, including significant economic benefits, how have we been doing at maintaining them on the landscape? Not very well. More than 72% of wetlands in Southern Ontario have been lost to development, far exceeding the global average of between 54 to 57%. and that loss continues despite policies and promises to halt and reverse wetland decline. Next slide, please. There are many policies protecting wetlands in Ontario, and it's very complicated. As noted in the province's 2017 Wetland Conservation Strategy, wetlands are managed through a variety of policies, including over 20 pieces of different legislation, administered by a variety of federal, provincial, municipal, and local authorities. That being said, there's a clear and demanding standard set for wetland protection in the provincial policy statement. It stipulates that provincially significant wetlands in southern and central Ontario and all significant coastal wetlands are strictly off limits to development. In Northern Ontario, the policy is slightly weaker. It allows development in significant wetlands if it can be demonstrated that there will be no negative impact on features or functions. In terms of political commitments, the Wetland Conservation Strategy for Ontario sets out two very clear targets. By 2025, the net loss of wetland area and function is halted where wetland loss has been the greatest. By 2030, a net gain in wetland area and function is achieved where wetland loss has been greatest. This commitment to halt and reverse wetland loss was picked up in Ontario's 2020 flooding strategy, which outlines government's intent to develop policy tools and approaches to prevent new wetland loss and work towards net gain, focusing on areas where wetland loss has been the greatest. The question of the day, of course, is whether the provincial government remains committed to these policies and targets. It appears that the government has mothballed the provincial wetland conservation strategy, and it's about to replace the provincial policy statement with as yet unannounced changes to its natural heritage policies. Next slide, please. What we do know is that recent provincial policy changes mean bad news for wetlands. These include the overhaul of the Ontario Wetland Evaluation System, the diminished role of conservation authorities through Bill 23, greenbelt land removals, replacement of the provincial policy statement, and the proposed provincial natural heritage offsetting policy. Next slide, please. So I'll begin with the overhaul of the Ontario Wetland Evaluation System. I would say that changes to this system, the O's, spell nothing less than disaster for wetlands. And that's because it will be much more difficult for wetlands to qualify as provincially significant. And that's because wetland complexes and species at risk will no longer be considered in wetland evaluations. And in the past, these were the two of the biggest factors in determining significance, but now they won't count, putting at risk many of the wetlands already deemed to be provincially significant in the past and making it much harder for additional wetlands to qualify in the future. Further, the provincial government is abdicating its role in wetland evaluations, and that likely means a free-for-all. Without the involvement of experts at the Ministry of Natural Resources and Forestry, who is to say whether a wetland evaluation is valid or not? And protection rides on that evaluation. What's the likely outcome of these changes? I think we'll see wetland losses accelerate and intensify. Next slide, please. The changes to the powers of conservation authorities brought forward through Bill 23 will also undermine wetland protection. I've highlighted three of the changes here. Restrictions prohibiting conservation authorities from commenting on development proposals, in particular non-mandatory services, watershed planning diminished, and conservation areas governed and owned by conservation authorities potentially opened up to development. Next slide, please. With respect to non-mandatory programs and services, the Conservation Authorities Act now prohibits conservation authorities from providing a municipal program or service related to reviewing and commenting on a proposal, application, or other matter prescribed by the Act. But as I'm no lawyer, I'm going to leave it to Jackie, our next speaker, to explain this in more detail about how it works. Next slide, please. Anyway, there seems to be little doubt that the Bill 23 changes run contrary to the expert advice provided by Ontario's Special Advisor on Flooding, who recommended that Ontario support conservation authorities to ensure conservation, restoration, and creation of natural green infrastructure, i.e. wetlands, forest cover, pervious surfaces, during land use planning to reduce runoff and mitigate the impacts of flooding. Next slide, please. The Greenbelt land removals likewise spell bad news for wetlands, and that's because many of the areas removed from the Greenbelt are now open to develop, and in many cases, development could have significant negative impacts on wetlands and the benefits they provide in Richmond Hill, Markham, Clarington, Pickering, Ajax, and so on. Next slide, please. What lies ahead with the new proposed provincial planning statement is anyone's guess. We know it will replace the provincial policy statement and the growth plan for the Greater Golden Horseshoe. Rumors are very concerning, but they're just rumors, so I won't go into them here. Suffice to say, if the changes reflect the general trend toward environmental deregulation that we see in Ontario, our wetlands will be in trouble. Next slide, please. The final big policy change I'm going to discuss is the proposed new natural heritage offsetting policy. This could be a really influential policy, and I'm concerned. That's because decades of research and experience on biodiversity offsetting, especially wetland offsetting, have demonstrated that it's an extremely risky practice that seldom meets policy objectives or fully compensates for wetland loss or degradation. Next slide, please. Wetland offsetting, for those who aren't familiar with the concept, it involves restoring or creating new wetlands to compensate for the negative impacts of development. In its essence, it's a trade-off, and the evidence to date overwhelmingly indicates that it's a trade-off that usually results in loss for nature and for communities. Destruction is certain, but full reparation is extremely uncertain. Does that mean we should just close the door and say no to offsetting? Well, it's not that straightforward. Unless we can realistically expect that there will be no more development allowed that harms wetlands, then there is a place for offsetting. If development is going to proceed regardless, then an offset is better than nothing. Next slide, please. What makes, oh, not quite there. Back one. Yep. What makes me and others especially nervous about offsetting is that the opportunity to offset is often used as a reason to allow development to proceed. Don't worry, the argument goes, we can compensate for the damage done, but it's a slippery slope. And that means we really need to ensure that offsetting policies at all levels reflect high standards. Some of the key principles are listed on this slide. Putting avoidance of harm first, aiming for net gain, affirmation of Indigenous rights, strict limits where offsetting is not appropriate, accounting for risk, uncertainty, and time lags, and designing offsets for the long term. Ontario Nature is in the process of finishing up a best practice guide to wetland offsetting policies for local planning authorities in Ontario. We expect to have it on our website in June, and we will be promoting it widely. I'll work with Gabby to ensure that everyone on the webinar today receives the link to the guide when it's ready. Next slide, please. In the meantime, we have a new online primer on wetland offsetting available on our website, ontarionature.org. Among other things, it sets out a 10-point framework for evaluating and developing wetland policies. If you have any questions or would like to discuss further, please don't hesitate to reach out to me by email anb@ontarionature.org. Next slide, please. And remember, at the end of the day, natural wetlands are best. Offsets rarely compensate for the damage done, and that applies to a whole range of values, including significantly carbon storage. Next slide, please. So what's the outlook for wetlands in Ontario? Well, let's not kid ourselves. It's pretty grim, but it's not without hope. And so here I offer you the wise words of Dr. Zeus's Wentzler. Unless someone like you cares a whole awful lot, nothing is going to get better. It's not. If we care enough, we can make a difference. I really believe that, but I also believe that this is not going to be easy. Next slide, please. Thanks so much for your attention. And now for some words of hope and inspiration about what can be done, I turn to Jackie Wilson from the Canadian Environmental Law Association.
Perfect. Thanks so much, Anne.
Yep.
I'm just going to stop sharing, Jackie, and then you should be able to do your sharing.
Thanks very much. My name is Jacqueline Wilson, and I'm a lawyer with the Canadian Environmental Law Association. I'm just going to share my screen here. Okay. We're a specialty legal aid clinic in Ontario. We focus on environmental justice, equity, and health. We provide litigation, law reform, and public legal education services. The first piece of the legal framework that I wanted to focus on is municipal powers to protect wetlands. So it's mostly tied to the Planning Act and the Provincial Policy Statement. I've put up here a few of the overarching broad sections of the Planning Act. One is the purposes of the Planning Act, which includes Section 1.1 sub F to recognize the decision-making authority and accountability of municipal councils. Section 2 lists the provincial interests in planning. There's a whole list, but the two of relevance to our conversation today are Section A, the protection of ecological systems, including natural areas, features, and functions, and S, the mitigation of greenhouse gas emissions and adaptation to a changing climate. One way to protect wetlands is then through municipal official plans authorized by Section 16 of the Planning Act. And I highlighted on this slide Section 16 sub 4, which notes that an official plan must provide for adaptation to a changing climate, including through increasing resiliency. And as you've heard from Anne's presentation, there's a wide body of scientific literature talking about how wetlands improve resiliency and help us adapt to a changing climate. Official plans must be consistent with the provincial policy statement. And there's a lot of language in the provincial policy statement that can support protection of natural heritage features like wetlands, regardless of their status as provincially significant. As Anne mentioned, the provincial policy statement is currently under review. There's an Environmental Registry of Ontario posting up right now with comments due on June 5th. And as Anne mentioned, the proposal is to combine the provincial policy statement and the growth plan, although the natural heritage sections have not yet been released or posted. So working off of then what we do know is the Provincial Policy Statement 2020, which is still in effect. Wetland protections, for the most part, are found in policies 2.1.4 and 2.1.5. 2.1.4 relates to wetlands, which are found to be provincially significant under the Ontario Wetland Evaluation System for Southern Ontario. That's what those ecoregions mean, and significant coastal wetlands. And what's so important about this protection is the strict prohibition on development or site alteration in wetlands that meet that threshold. Policy 2.1.5 of the provincial policy statement is less stringent. So for provincially significant wetlands in Northern Ontario and significant and coastal wetlands that don't meet the significance criteria in the evaluation system, the prohibition is only if it can also be demonstrated that there will be no negative impacts on the natural features or their functions, which is a legal test that's applied at the Ontario Land Tribunal. The changes to the Ontario Wetland Evaluation System are very important because it's that evaluation system that's tied to these protections in the provincial policy statement. So as more and more wetlands will either be delisted as provincially significant or other ones can't meet the threshold, they won't get these protections in the provincial policy statement. However, even for wetlands not deemed provincially significant, there are other policies, as I mentioned, in the provincial policy statement, which do promote their preservation and which would allow an official plan consistent with the PPS to protect them. I've listed one, it's policy 1.8.1, that states that a planning authority shall support preparing for the impacts of a changing climate by considering the mitigating effects of vegetation and green infrastructure, and maximizing vegetation within settlement areas. Of course, another key municipal planning tool is zoning bylaws. And I've highlighted this section of the Planning Act, which does tie zoning to the significance criteria, so the significant wildlife habitat or wetlands. There is significant direction in the Planning Act and provincial policy statement relating to protecting natural features. So municipalities may still deem local features worthy of protection outside of this OWES evaluation, and even if they don't meet the provincial significance standard. So all of these more general directions to be concerned about, for instance, climate change, resiliency, and adaptation, support protecting wetland features outside of the OWES process. Interestingly, one of the amendments that was made to that OWES document was that Appendix 1, which previously talked about locally important wetlands, has been deleted, but it's not been replaced with anything to suggest that there can't be sort of a determination of local importance. I do want to caution, though, that municipal decisions to prevent a particular development, so in the face of a development proposal, in order to save a non-provincially significant wetland, could be challenged at the Ontario Land Tribunal. And without those core protections under section 2.1.4, most importantly, but the less stringent but still available 2.1.5, you would then see disputes between land use planners or natural heritage experts about which policy should prevail in balancing interests under the provincial policy statement. So on a case-by-case basis, I think there's going to be a bit of a problem. And in fact, it's missing some of this broader picture that Anne was talking about the cumulative loss and the cumulative assistance that wetlands provide. Section 47 of the Planning Act allows for minister's zoning orders, and those prevail over local planning zoning bylaws, and it does not need to be consistent with the provincial policy statement as per the Planning Act. In those cases, there's little that can be done on a local level. I'm going to turn now to the Conservation Authorities Act changes, focusing on the relationship of the conservation authorities with municipalities in this sphere about wetland protection. There's now a large distinction that's been drawn under the Conservation Authorities Act between mandatory programs and services and non-mandatory programs and services. Under the Conservation Authorities Act, Section 21.1 outlines what the mandatory programs and services of conservation authorities are, which includes natural hazards. The term natural hazards is defined in Ontario Regulation 686/21, Section 1, and I've listed what is included here. So it's dynamic beach hazards, erosion hazards, flooding hazards of particular importance to our conversation, hazardous lands, hazardous sites, and also of significant importance for wetlands, low water and drought conditions. The conservation authorities shall design programs and services referred to as natural hazards to achieve a list of objectives. And this is also included in Ontario Regulation 686/21. So for instance, Conservation authorities are tasked with developing an awareness of the areas that are important for the management of natural hazards, including wetlands, understanding the risks related to natural hazards, including how these risks may be affected by climate change, managing the risks related to natural hazards, including preventing or mitigating those risks, and promoting public awareness about risks related to natural hazards. In section 1 sub 3 of that same regulation, conservation authorities can include a list of components relating again to their mandatory programs and services, including natural hazards like flooding. So that's where you see power to delineate and map areas of natural hazards, study surface water hydrology and hydraulics, study the potential effects of climate change on natural hazards. Conservation authorities will continue to do flood forecasting and warnings and drought and low water forecasting as well. Importantly as well, conservation authorities may still comment on applications and proposals as they relate to these mandatory programs and services, and in this case, natural hazards. That is included in section 6 of Ontario Regulation 686/21, which provides that a conservation authority can review proposals under the Aggregate Resources Act, the Drainage Act, the Environmental Assessment Act, and the Niagara Escarpment Planning and Development Act for the purpose, though, of commenting on the risk to natural hazards. So it's tied again to that defined piece that's a mandatory program. Section 7 of that regulation provides similar powers as they relate to Planning Act proposals for conservation authorities. And what conservation authorities are tasked with looking at under these changes is consistency with the natural hazard provisions in the provincial policy statement. And that can include comments, technical support, and information to the planning authority, which is often the municipality. So that section 7, sub 2, sub 3, allows a municipality to request a conservation authority to provide advice, technical support, training, and any information that the municipality requires to assess consistency with the natural hazard policies of the PPS. That's section 7, sub 2, sub 3 of Ontario Regulation 686/21. Back to the Act, the Conservation Authorities Act, section 21.1.1 relates to non-mandatory programs and services. And that's where there's significant restrictions that have been put in place on the authority of conservation authorities. That's significant because in the past, conservation authorities have regularly entered into memorandums of understanding with municipalities to assist with the review of natural heritage issues more broadly. So what all this means is that conservation authority power and assistance that can be provided to municipalities, especially as they're reviewing a development proposal, is tied to only the mandatory programs and services, natural hazards, and that flooding risk that's listed as a natural hazards. Wetlands, of course, play a key role to prevent flooding risk, and so that's important. But this conservation authority power isn't tied, for instance, to the determination of provincial significance under the Ontario Wetland Evaluation System. Those are two different inquiries, and the conservation authority power is tied to that natural hazard piece, not the piece about the entirety of the provincial significance evaluation. So to put it another way, what's being lost is that conservation authorities can't assist municipalities with determining, first of all, if a wetland is provincially significant, or any of these sort of broader values and issues that are being brought forward in looking at the destruction of wetlands. The CA rule, though, relating to flood forecasting and warning and surface water hydrology, for instance, should be used by municipalities in making development decisions and to ensure that there's safe development that doesn't, of course, cause a flooding risk. I'm going to end my presentation there, but I'll note that what Anne's presentation makes very clear is how important wetlands are in broad ways that are wider than either the natural hazard scope under the Conservation Authorities Act or the way that provincial significance is being determined now under the OWES system. Thank you. I'll turn it back to Gabby.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Jackie. Thank you. And I want to give you a big shout out. You've just saved us all a lot of time and struggle to try and translate the changes and delivered it in plain English, which I truly appreciate, because I can't be the only one who reads some of these kind of legislative changes. And I'm like, I have no idea what they're saying. So thank you for that. I really appreciate that. And just so everybody knows, we will be sharing all the presentations, and I will also be sharing all the resources that were added, identified in the chat in the proceedings, and please do feel free to share that with others in your municipality who you think either will or should be interested in that. So I'm going to open it up to just some questions from the group. We do have some consultations and some input through a Menti kind of process that we would love to kind of engage with, and I might start doing that while we're answering questions to get some dual action taking place on that one. But I'm going to open it up to the participants if anybody has any questions for Jackie or for Anne. And then just while we're doing that, I'm going to, oh yeah, take it away, John.
Yeah, thank you. Mainly for Jacqueline, it's just something I didn't see in the slides as they came up. So 68621 1 sub 2 expands on those natural hazards and includes areas of jurisdiction, which includes wetlands specifically referenced. And on that note, Conservation Authority that we work with, Conservation Halton, has been clear that they will be providing comments regarding wetlands on Planning Act applications, not obviously as it relates to significance or the ecological side of it, but as it relates to hazards and stormwater management. So do wetlands still fall in within the purview, given that wetlands are still within Conservation Authority's jurisdictions for Planning Act matters, I guess is the question I have.
Yeah, that's great to hear. So the section you're mentioning does provide a good kind of source of power on this issue. So what it says, I've opened it up, the reg, but I'll post it in the chat after what the language actually is in terms of the, it is still tied to natural hazards. That's kind of the overarching umbrella that this all falls under. But what it says is the Conservation Authority shall design the programs and services referred to in subsection 1, which is including flooding. And it does specifically stay in sub 1, second sub 1, developing an awareness of the areas that are important for the management of the natural hazards, including wetlands. So that's, I think, where that piece lies. But I agree, there's a significant power that remains about Conservation Authority assistance in looking at a development proposal as it relates to wetlands, for sure. And I hope that that's going to be understood and interpreted broadly.
And based on that, sorry, based on that, Jacqueline, one of I'm so used to calling you Jackie, so I'm kind of, I apologize for that. What about, like, who determines what a natural hazard is?
The definitions are in the provincial policy statement. So in the regulation, those are adopted. So there's I could put up a few, but there's, a way to determine those things, and those are defined terms. Yeah.
Okay. So there is a structure for it, because it's not like there's a criteria. That's not necessarily, it could be interpreted broadly, or it could be interpreted narrowly by a municipality or conservation authority. Is that correct?
Well, why don't I put up an example so you can see what I'm talking about, because it's actually, it's a fairly elaborate definition in the provincial policy statement. Again, remembering that that's open for review right now, right? So the provincial policy statement is being reviewed, and that might change. But
and then while we're doing that, I'm just also gonna start this. And also, I am going to throw in some of the questions associated with it. But if you can just go to menti.com. Just putting it all in the chat. Bear with me. And then you can just put in 3494264. Let me just make sure I got this right. 34942648. And then in there, and we just wanted to get a little bit of insights in terms of where some conversations have been taking place within the municipalities on changes to wetland protection, its implications. And just a reminder, just for folks who joined in later, we are going to be providing all of the recording for this webinar, the PowerPoint presentations, and the resources that were identified in the presentations, all to everybody via email, so that you can share that with others in your municipalities, and hopefully will help for those conversations taking place, and also those that are going to be taking place. Alrighty. It's good to see that there's been some conversations that have been taking place. So we're going to go on to the next question. If conversations have occurred, what topics have been the focus of the discussion? And if you are able to add the name of your municipality, if willing, if you're able to do that. We just want to kind of understand what conversations or what have been taking place across municipalities and what might have been discussed as part of them. And if anyone has any questions, don't be shy. We can address the questions. If you have any questions for Jackie or for Anne, please just unmute and take it away. I can't see the PowerPoint I can't see the participant list quite as well during when I'm sharing my screen. But let me just pull it up, making sure. All right. Oh, I can't see them. How come I can't see them? Let's see. Maybe I need to. Oops, sorry. I'm going to go back. There we go. It's now coming. Now kicking in. Why is it doing that? Huh, why is it not showing those presentations? Give me 1 second here. Never had that happen before. Show layout. Oh, weirdo. Okay, let me just get back in here. I will figure out a way to make this work. I'm going to see what is going on. Why not? Come on. Show results. Apply to all. It should be showing the results. Let me just put it into a flowing grid and see if that works. Huh. All right, well, I will do it this way then. Haha, find ways around this. Not that people can see it. So I'm just gonna view results. Oh, for crying out loud, it's not working. I apologize for that. I don't know why it's not showing that. So we're going to go on to the next one. Let me just actually give me a second. I'm going to read out some of them just to make it life easier on that one for folks. All right. It does come out to, so I wanted to kind of provide some internal conversations on this. Wetland identification and improved mapping process framework for identifying significant wetlands via new evaluation system and possible policy directions. Some municipalities have done analysis of what provincially significant wetlands could potentially be lost from their jurisdiction. Others are looking at staff resources, Planning Act, offsetting, mapping as one of the topics. City of Ottawa is looking at continued role of the conservation authorities and Planning Act applications, mechanisms for protecting wetlands in context of weakened provincial policy statement and Ontario wetlands evaluation protections. Responsibilities of local authorities and partnerships between municipalities and conservation authorities. Who's going to be reviewing the provincially the Ontario wetland evaluation system that comes in as development applications, identifying who's going to be able to review them, the impacts on protecting wetlands through the development process. What are the options available to municipalities? In Caledon, they're looking at what policies could our OP include that could strengthen protections. All right, so I'm going to share all of these results of this would be, oh, that's what I needed to do. I'm so sorry. All right. Does your municipality have a map of provincially significant wetlands? Have you identified the provincially significant wetlands that are within your jurisdiction, within your municipality's jurisdiction? Do you know where they are? Have you worked with your conservation authorities for that? Yay, yay, yes is winning, yes is winning, yes is winning. Excellent, excellent. That's lovely. All right, I'm going to go on to the next one. When updating stormwater plans, has your municipality used future climate projections, or does it still rely largely on historical data? And we're just trying to get a lay of the land on where municipalities are at. All right. Excellent. Thank you so much for that input. Really appreciate it. Another kind of question is, when designing or updating stormwater infrastructure, does your municipality bring in climate projections into decision? Oh, like, sorry, typo, decision making. And this is more about like when designing specific infrastructure for stormwater, what that kind of decision making looks like. All right, this is really helpful for finding out. Thank you so much for that. And how does your municipality map consider flood risk? Select all that apply. Rely only on conservation authority maps, up-to-date data from stormwater infrastructure. Has land cover been mapped? And that's kind of along the lines of just kind of understanding, or tracks permeable versus impermeable cover over time, brings that into it. Has municipal staff expertise. You can add, you don't have to choose only one. You're choosing all the ones that would apply to your municipality. Does a municipality have capacity to develop and run models? And if here's an other aspect, if you don't mind throwing that into the chat, that would be really, really helpful as well. Oh, I'm really great to see that land cover has been mapped, and that there's municipalities who track permeable versus unpermeable cover. And if you are able to share, if you could put in your either your chat, or you can email me in particular with regards to land cover mapped and on our tracking permeable versus impermeable over time. If you could just throw that into the chat, or you can send me an email. I'd love to learn a little bit more about how your municipality does that. And I would love to highlight how your municipality does that to other municipalities as well. All right, excellent. Does your municipality have a stormwater charge in place, or if stormwater is funded just off the property tax base? So if there's a stormwater fee, or if there's property taxes only, or if there's some sort of combination of the two, is in how municipality identifies it. And if you're willing to identify which municipality are in the chat, please do that. That would be greatly appreciated as well. We're just trying to understand how municipalities. Oh, thank you for adding that with Muskoka. Thank you. So it looks like we've got a tie between stormwater fee and property taxes. Let's see if someone's going to break the tie. Who's going to win? Come on, stormwater fee. Come on, stormwater fee. Thank you. Ah, thanks, Ajax. Oh no, property taxes took the heat on that one. All right, take the lead. Let's see. One more second before we can see if we get a tie. All right, we're going to go next. If your municipality has their stormwater fee in place, if you can write your municipality below, that would be great, or you can throw it into the chat. We just wanted to kind of get a lay of the land on that. That would be great, super helpful. I'm going to just move in the infants of time. I'm going to just do it right now, just going on to the next one. Does your municipality require a wetland evaluation as part of a complete development application? If you can, just state your name of your municipality in the process. That would be great. I didn't put this as a multiple choice just because I wanted to kind of get a sense of which municipalities do require an wetland evaluation as part of a full development application. And I will share these. Oh, interesting. This is such great data. Thank you so much, people. I really appreciate this. All right, I'm going to just show what's on this one. Ah, I like we'll have to follow up in terms of it, just in terms of the person, if it just could describe what makes the factor where a wetland evaluation would be a factor. Is it just where there's some wetlands? Like if you wouldn't require it in an intensification area, but you would require it, let's say on a green field that has wetland ecosystem services to provide? Is that the thinking at the City of Ottawa in terms of just being targeted in which requires a wetland evaluation? Oh, here it's thanks, Julia. Uses conservation authority riverine flood risk mapping. Okay, thank you. Okay, perfect. I getcha. Thanks. Okay. And has your municipality had discussions with regards to an offsetting policy? Yes, no, what discussions have occurred, name of municipality, just any rationale that you might have provided. And we won't have time for a breakout session during this webinar. We're already really super close to time, but I did want to kind of get some input for folks that they can see on that one. But one of the things that we are going to be doing as part of this is we're going to kind of identify what's the approach municipalities are using to identify their opportunities to protect wetlands, whether they're deemed, like obviously you don't have to protect wetlands deemed provincially significant, but protecting wetlands that do not make the new cut on the evaluation on provincial significance because they're often too small. And the only way they are able to really make the case is when they are considered as part of a larger system rather than just in isolation, because we know that wetlands, especially the smaller wetlands, they work they work as a system, but they don't necessarily provide enough significance at the small little level that they are often the place within our municipalities in Southern Ontario. So we really want to try and get an understanding of that, get some lay of the lands, and then we're going to be kind of having further conversations where municipalities can share the approaches that they're using to learn a little bit from each other. So what priority topics are slated for municipal discussions? Wetlands, flood risk consideration, changes to wetland evaluation and flood risk. We want to kind of understand from you what topics are on your radar for future discussions, and then how can we how can we support the sharing of the approaches and the topics and the input being discussed in municipalities. And what I might actually do as part of this, I know I'm probably being utterly naive on this one, but I'd like, this is one of the key topics that we'd like to get some insight. And it's maybe too early to know exactly what that's going to be. But what I probably will do is create a mechanism where we can actually, this key question will probably be something that we want to talk about moving forward. And if people think that there is value in engaging on a collective discussion across municipalities, if you could just throw up your thumb right now, that would give us an idea of how people think, what people think would be really useful in terms of sharing approaches, tactics, for how to protect municipal opportunities to protect wetlands within their jurisdiction that are not deemed to be provincially significant with the new evaluation system. I wonder how, like, really pacing, have there been conversations like about how to bring in staff from conservation authorities into the municipalities? Is that something that some municipalities have been discussing? And I'd like to get some insights if that is something. Because I know a lot of municipalities have relied on their conservation authorities in planning reviews and stuff like that. I was just wondering if there was some, if that has been something that has been discussed, or if that's anything that we would need to, if that's something that's a future discussion. Oh, interesting. Okay. Remote sensing process for completing. Oh, that's very interesting. All right. Excellent. So this is really useful input. I really appreciate that. Are you still able to provide your input on this one? I'm just going to stop the sharing just so I can see people's faces before we end. I really want to give a big shout out again to Jacqueline and to Anne. Thank you so much for taking, bringing your expertise to the municipal network and saving us all a lot of struggles of trying to translate what the changes are and what the implications may be moving forward. And I want to thank all the municipal participants for joining this webinar. Again, I will be sharing the recording of this webinar, the PowerPoint the presentations from Anne and from Jackie, as well as the resources that were highlighted. We'll be sharing the results that came out of the input, and then we're going to be identifying, I think the last question is the one that I think is going to be particularly of interest to the municipalities. But if there are specific ideas that you have for how we, or what would be of most value to you in terms of having a collective input across a municipal network, never be shy, send me an email. I'm just going to put my email, actually you're going to get my email in the proceedings I send out. So just reply back to back to us with any insights you have on future discussions that you think are really, really important. I will be sharing all of the results from the input that you received. I want to thank you all for joining this webinar and for really and for taking the time to talk about this really, really important topic. And that there is a lot of opportunities for us to make sure that we are using whatever avenues are available to protect wetlands within our communities, not only for the ecological, not only for the sheer value of protecting all of the ecosystem and biodiversity and habitat aspects, but also to address the flood risk that we know will be increased as a result of not protecting wetlands within our jurisdiction. So thanks everybody. Thank you, Jackie. Thank you, Anne, and have a great day, everybody. See you later.